This disarm and throw is one of the most documented and potentially popular from the German tradition. Today, let's train it. The technique that we're talking about today actually doesn't have a name, so one of the fun things you can do in the comments, if you're interested, maybe help us out. One of the things that I've been doing is actually calling this the pretzel technique, just because of how twisted up the person is in it. But the reason this is one of our favorite techniques, it shows up early in the 1500s, as early as the 1500s, documented in the Baumann or Wallerstein manuscript, but then shows up cribbed by as many as 4 other sources, and then shows up in other traditions, including contemporary things like Fiore in the Italian tradition, but also in modern context as well, in certain stick fighting systems. So what we're going to do in the next couple of weeks, one, we'll start this week by actually just focusing on training it, just purely training it, trying to understand the technique. Next week, we're actually going to look at, again, the technique with variations and understanding the context where some of that stuff comes from the sources. And then the week after that, once we really understand the technique, we're actually going to go back to Paul Meyer, who writes probably the most about it, gives us the most context, and we'll find something maybe interesting and maybe a little concerning about how to actually interpret Paul Meyer, who is, again, one of those really hard sources to crack. This may be one of the reasons that he's difficult to crack. So we'll come back to all of that in a little bit. How does this work? Before we train it, we're going to talk through the different components of the so-called pretzel technique, or again, in the comments, suggest something better. So this is going to be off of a bind. So from here, when we bind, here's kind of like the more full sequence when it comes to the original source, which is probably the Baumann manuscript. So from here, if I bind and I actually wind to his head, one of the things he can do is basically counterwind, right? And as we're counterwinding, both of us are basically safe. So circle, right? We're circling, and we circle all the way around just so we can get back to the same perspective. So this picture is in Baumann. And then one of the things he says there is, like, from here, I'm actually going to actually see if I can hit this elbow, right? So I go from here to here. And one of the things that you can do this kind of a parry, but you can also do a crump type parry. Boom. And then when this happens, it then becomes very easy for me to do the very first step, which is to just get this overwrap, right? Get this, right? As I do this, what I don't want to do is let this come really far out. I want to keep this close to the outside, and then that allows me to go here. And we already get into that position by doing this. However, if we just did this, all of a sudden we get into that throw position where I've got that foot. You can step forward a little bit. There we go, right? Yep, so more like this. From here, now I can do that throw. If I want to be really aggressive about it, I can actually get all the way out here. I can kind of throw backwards, okay? So those are sort of like the 3 big components, right? So again, we bind. So I can get to this position, right? I want to overwrap. And careful not to go here where I kind of wrap myself. Wrap here behind my own blade over his. And while I do that, also come to the outside to place here while I double triangle and get over to here. Okay. So putting all of that together. So boom, boom. It's basically how it goes. Okay. So again, I'll do that a little bit. Like as we kind of work with people doing this, it's the sword equivalent of doing this, right? So there's a lot to sort of coordinate, and so I think it's helpful to kind of think sequentially. Do that right Zorn, get underneath, step into this right here. It helps to think deep, like trying to hit that elbow. Just trying to make sure I've got that cover, and then go over while I come to the outside, while I step. Boom. Okay, so one last time. So boom, boom. Okay. And there are variations you can do once we get that flow down. One more time. So from here, and especially if he does more of a crump-like version, notice then it becomes a little easier to get actually not just here, but actually deep between his hands. So that's another variation that people will be illustrating. So from here, boom. So that's sort of extra leverage with the hand kind of coming up. So now, as we do this, one other thing to get to is then the actual counter to this. So there are a few different counters. If you just give me your arm, just this arm, just, yeah, there we go. So if you think about it, basically what I'm trying to do is I'm overwrapping, doing this. So anytime I'm doing this, this also allows for the counter, which is this, right? So this sort of like upper key, lower key in sort of like Fiore Italian terminology. I can come this way and crank him this way, but he can also do the same thing. So in that sense, we go ahead, boom, as I'm wrapping, he can do the same thing and actually crank me this way. And so this gets into a counter that we'll kind of talk through. There's a couple variations of it, but fundamentally, this is also introducing something we'll be talking about in a few weeks, namely the slice. Okay, so we'll be getting more to that in a little bit, but hopefully that's a good breakdown of just how the technique itself works, along with a basic counter. Next thing we're about to do is actually, okay, how do we actually train it? So now we're going to talk about how to train this, and we're going to use the same framework that we've been using the past couple of videos, this whole Frequens Motus framework. And the whole idea between Frequens Motus, frequent motion, is that we're not doing sort of like a static start, static stop, reset kind of situation. Like we're going to be flowing, like there's going to be movement sort of before and after, during and after the technique. So the kind of standard flow was going to be like he's cutting like Zorns on his left and his right, and he's actually going to randomize those. So I don't necessarily know. And I'm actually going to be looking for a cue. I'm going to be looking for a right Zorn where I can try to execute the technique. So go ahead and just kind of randomly through right and left Zorns. So, okay, I'm going to crump. These are my default defenses. Boom. And I turn it into a shield, but I can go back here. I kite, boom, 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 boom. Oh, so I thought that was going to be a right Zorn. Boom, boom. Right. So that's where we actually try to do that nice and smoothly into it. Okay, so again, oops, so, boom, oh, boom. Okay, so yeah, so this whole idea of like doing it nice and smooth and looking for that cue so I can actually try to grab it. So now let's go ahead and randomize so we can add more and more complexity to make it more and more realistic as something where I have to kind of look up for opportunities, but stay safe. So actually, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to occasionally throw some attacks at you as well, so to keep you honest as the attacker. Okay, so here we go. So I'm defending. So notice here, I'm actually doing the box step. Okay, so, and that wasn't the cleanest one. That's okay, that's part of the practice. A couple more times, boom. Oh, and I missed it, that's okay, that's part of the practice. Let's see if I can get one more good clean one, go ahead. Boom. Okay. All right. So yeah. So basically, set up that flow. Go ahead and just do that. So I'm, dealing with this cut. I'm doing whatever defenses are necessary until I look for a good position to initiate, and then just flow into it. Which obviously you can't do until you have just kind of walking through it. So this, right? You got to be able to get that flow first, and then from there, put it into like an actual flow that you can make more and more complicated until it's basically kind of like a sparring situation. So I think we're going to call that good for this video. Next video, we'll talk about counters. We showed one of those counters right now. In fact, actually, do we want to do one last one? I think we'll end the video with hopefully Brandon. I'm going to do the technique, and he's actually going to do that arm lock counter, and we'll call that good for today. All right, ready? Oh. If you guys have been enjoying the stuff that we've been putting out, please help us grow, like, share, subscribe, and we'd love to really actually broaden the scope of things that we're doing, including everything from looking at rare books and antiques, interviews with noted scholars in the field, to actually seeing how some of the stuff actually intersects with pop culture. So yeah, help us out.